So suffice to say, the last year and a half has been a wild, crazy ride with the Activision Blizzard acquisition. Thanks for coming along, by the way, but do buckle up and hold on to your jimmies because we're still not quite finished just yet. It's just been one twist after another, and I mean, what do you know? In such a typical fitting fashion, the last week or so has been nothing short of exactly that. Something I said yesterday, though, is that the good news here is that we will likely get our answers this week, whether good or bad. Regardless of what side you're on, pro-acquisition or not, it does appear we are in the end game. Things are finally coming to an end, and that now seems cemented by an early indication that points to Microsoft closing the mega acquisition as early as this Saturday morning. Yes, it might finally be over, so long as the FTC doesn't get their way. More on that here in just a second. But we will talk about that today, as well as a couple other topics. This is still News Dose after all. It's just a little bit different considering the magnitude of this overall story. All gamers, they seem to have their eyes glued on the Activision topic because, the implications are absolutely game-changing. In certain ways, this could change the game industry as we know it. So what I'm going to go and do here is I'm just going to go and get right into the Activision stuff today. That's probably why most of you are here in the first place. And then after that, we'll talk about Sony and also another surprisingly good showcase here in just a bit. So do stay tuned for all of that as well. But what's the latest on the Activision stuff, and why is it now widely believed that Microsoft is about ready to close the Activision acquisition? Well, that's actually because NASDAQ announced that Activision Blizzard will be removed from the NASDAQ 100 index prior to the market opening on Monday, July 17th. Instead, it'll be replaced by the Trade Desk Incorporated, which means that Activision, for the first time since 2005, will no longer be a part of the open market. Now, if you don't know what all this means, this type of stuff typically happens when a company is acquired. After all, they will be a part of another company now, in this case being Microsoft. So this is, yes, a strong indication that Microsoft is already making swift plans to close the deal as early as Saturday morning. Now, they'll still have to get everything in order, and there will need to be careful planning for all of this, or else this acquisition could instead happen on Monday. But truthfully, I imagine Microsoft has had this in their back pocket for quite some time. I think the planning phase is far in the rearview mirror by this point. So right now, we are looking at a possible Saturday or Monday closure. Now, if you're unaware, though, and why they can't do this right now, the reason Microsoft has to wait until at least Saturday is because they're still under a temporary restraining order, keeping them from acquiring Activision. This was a part of the FTC's preliminary injunction filing. They did get a TRO, though thanks to Judge Corley, the TRO will end by the end of tomorrow on July 14th. However, though, even with all this, Microsoft isn't completely out of the woods just yet because there is still one possible hurdle, and of course, as you all probably know, that is the FTC. We talked about this yesterday, but the FTC, they filed for an appeal, which, that alone, it doesn't really have any bearings on what will happen in the coming days, but a part of their appeal, and this is the important part, is the request for an emergency stay, which could extend the TRO. This is actually what the FTC is aiming for. If the FTC is granted this emergency motion before Microsoft can act, then Microsoft will be unable to close the deal before their July 18th deadline, and that really is the key to this entire fiasco. See, I keep seeing this question online. Why is the FTC wasting money to appeal Judge Corley's decision? I think we all kind of know the FTC does not have a good case. I think even people who are against this deal kind of understands the FTC does not have a good case. They never have, they never will, and I believe even the FTC understands this simple fact. What they're trying to do here, though, is they're trying to get the TRO extended beyond July 18th, which will then force Microsoft and Activision to renegotiate the deal. And there's no 100% guarantee that Activision and Microsoft will once again agree. If something like that were to happen and they couldn't come to some type of an agreement, well, then the deal would be essentially dead, and Microsoft would have to pay Activision $3 billion to split up. So time is of the essence here. It's not a battle of facts anymore. It's a battle of time. The FTC more or less is shooting for a Hail Mary with a delay tactic. It's nothing more than that. Now, I've also seen some speculation that the FTC decided to appeal to avoid questions from the Congress today, which could actually be a part of this. They did grill Lina Khan quite a bit today, and they're clearly not happy with her decisions. She was heavily scrutinized for her actions. She was accused of losing non-winnable cases on purpose and just wasting money to basically prove her ideology. The FTC, they were actually requesting a 33% budget increase, but instead, they received a 25% fund reduction today thanks to her actions. They made it very clear to her that there are consequences for her actions. That's what happens, though. You do a bad job, and you face the repercussions. That's what happened here. Lina Khan's honestly been awful for the FTC. That's for a different topic, though. What's been clear to me about this particular case, though, is that the FTC has attempted to delay this acquisition beyond the July 18th deadline at every single corner. They've done everything that they can to delay justice. One thing that really stood out to me in the court case, though, is when Judge Corley mentioned the FTC can still sue after July 18th if they want. As she said, nothing changes negatively. None of this will impact consumers, and that was one of the big reasons that the FTC was denied a preliminary injunction. All of the FTC's arguments have centered around protecting Sony, the market leader. But as Judge Corley wisely pointed out, this is not about Sony. It's about consumers. That's who we're supposed to protect. And the fact is, there's no immediate irreparable harm to consumers. They, the FTC, needed to prove that to get the PI. And the FTC, they had every single opportunity to make a case for immediate harm, but they just couldn't do it. Instead, the findings found that there is legitimate reasons to believe that this will be pro-consumer as well as also pro-competitive. Call of Duty will now be available to more people, not less. And with the inclusion of Game Pass, it could also incentivize Sony to step up their own subscription offering. These points are coming directly from Judge Corley, not me. But the reason that I bring all this up is that none of this has changed. The FTC, they want an emergency motion, but granting a motion like this would be illogical. There is no immediate harm, and by granting an extended TRO, that could effectively kill the deal. That seems highly unlikely when nothing will stop the FTC from fighting Microsoft without a TRO. Again, it's just a delay tactic. That's all this is, because that's the FTC's only hope, to use cheap tactics. And it seems highly unlikely that the court would fall for such a cheap tactic like this. Now, I can't guarantee what will happen, but from my own personal prediction, the FTC will be denied. And now that we know that Activision is being removed from the NASDAQ, the acquisition might very well be completed as early as this Saturday, or maybe even Monday if they can't get it done by then. What about the CMA, though? I know a lot of people are wondering about that as well. They still haven't approved it there, so what exactly is happening with all that? But I don't think that this is really a major concern as of this moment, or at least until we know more. All we currently know, as of this moment, is that the CMA and Microsoft have paused the CAT trial, and apparently they're talking about some type of resolution. As I said yesterday, I can't imagine Microsoft would do something like that unless they had some type of indication that the two can work something out, whether sooner or later. Now, what I mean by that is that for the short term, maybe the CMA just approves the buyout with some type of remedy and everybody just kind of moves on. That would be the best thing that could happen here. Or if the rumors are true, that there is some type of deal restructure, and if another investigation might be needed because of that, in that case, I still believe that Microsoft likely has a good indication that it will be approved later down the road. In that case, they could close over the CMA, and the two could just kind of deal with that situation in parallel. So for all my UK peeps out there, don't worry too much about this right now, at least until we hear more. If something comes out that says otherwise, then we can kind of come back to this topic, and then we can all freak out together, because I'm not going to be happy if you all miss out on stuff either. It's not an ideal situation if the CMA screws UK gamers over. Hopefully that won't happen, though. To me, though, it does sound like the two will come to some type of understanding. The hope, though, is just that that understanding will be made sooner rather than later. There you go, though. I mean, a lot is definitely happening right now, and with a story like this, it's constantly evolving. So do go ahead and make sure to subscribe because the next few days could get real interesting. Moving on, though, let's just go and talk about Sony because a report came out revealing that they're going to ramp up their financial resources, $2.13 billion in the gaming research and development. This investment will be made before the end of their 2024 fiscal year. This report came in the way of Nikki, and I think at first, this report sounds exciting. Anytime Sony can invest more into gaming, that's a good thing for gamers, which it is. But at the same time, this report also revealed Sony's continued priority on live service titles. Something that's become very clear in the last year or so is that Jim Ryan's PlayStation is different than what we saw last generation under Sean Layden. Jim Ryan is increasingly putting a big focus on live service titles, and according to Nikki, and reported by Insider Gaming, Sony plans to allocate 60% of all PlayStation 5 development spending to live service games exclusively for the year ending in March of 2026. Now, to be fair here, with an increased budget, it is important to keep in mind that even if it's just 40% for single player, that is still a large investment. Let's just kind of be clear about that. And Sony does continue to be adamant that single player is still important to them, which it very well should be. This is exactly why Sony is in the position that they are today. Their single player exclusive catalog. And that is what their fan base loves. But it has become evident fans should brace themselves to expect a lot of live service content from PlayStation in the coming years. It appears they now have more multiplayer games in development than they do single player, which that is just such a huge shift in their overall strategy. Well, I'm not against multiplayer myself. Some of my favorite games of all time are multiplayer games, so I like the idea of Sony investing in these type of games. This is a weak point in their overall catalog, but at the same time, I also can't help but be dissatisfied that this type of investment didn't further increase what they're good at in the first place. In other words, I think I, as well as a lot of other PlayStation fans, would have been more excited about a 70-30 split or even a 60-40 split with the majority of the investment focused on single player. Now, I understand Sony's logic here. They're throwing as many of these live service games at the wall as they can in the hopes one will stick and become a mega hit for them. It's the mythical cash cow syndrome, as I often like to describe them. All these companies want the next Fortnite, but the reality is most of these live service games are quickly forgotten and shuttered because the competition for live service games are just so high. They'll need to pry gamers away from games that they already love. I guess this is one of the reasons that they did acquire Bungie, though, to kind of make sure these live service games are good. They're actually delaying Naughty Dog's live service game because of this. Apparently, they didn't meet the standard that Bungie wanted. So hopefully, these live service games will be of the utmost quality. But either way, do expect those PlayStation multiplayer games to ramp up quite significantly over the next 3 to 4 years. Now, lastly here, Limited Run Games had their showcase yesterday. I don't think that there was a lot of eyes on this event, but that's really too bad because it turned out to be a surprisingly good showcase. They announced a lot of games, some of which are particularly exciting. Now, I'll include a full list in the description below if you want to check that out, but there were really 4 big highlights here that I want to talk about. First of which is the Castlevania Advance Collection. I have been waiting for this for such a long time, but thanks to Limited Run Games, it is now set to get a physical release, which that's a big deal. First off, these are some of the better 2D Castlevania games, but even more so, the only physical versions of these games are on the Game Boy Advance, which are quite expensive. The Area of Sorrow Game Boy Advance game, as an example, will run you $75+. So after all of these years, a more affordable physical release is much needed. So if you have been waiting for a physical release, open pre-orders will go live on July 28th. Keep in mind, you'll only have a limited window to pre-order unless it also comes to Amazon later on. But if you want to play it safe, you might want to keep an eye out for those open pre-orders on the Limited Run Games website. Now, speaking of Game Boy Advance games, though, they're also releasing Shantae Advance Risky Revolution on a Game Boy Advance cart. Now, I'm unsure if this will also include modern platforms. I imagine it will eventually, if not immediately. But this is an interesting release in the sense that this game never made it to the public with its original planned release. It got canceled years ago after Shantae on the Game Boy Color failed to have success. But here we are years later, and it's officially back. I mean, how often do you hear a story like this, where a canceled game is revived? This is a very rare circumstance. Hey, I guess there's hope for a Scalebound revival after all. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Sorry, I just had to say it. Two more big surprises here, though, came in a way of some retro ports making their way to modern platforms using the Limited Run Games Carbon engine. This is their development tool that allows legacy content to be ported to modern platforms, and they're making use of this with Tomba. Yes, Tomba, and then also the Gex trilogy. Now, Tomba is an older PlayStation platformer. I've not played this one personally, but I do understand a lot of people really like this game. It is set to release for PlayStation, Nintendo, and PC. Unfortunately, it is going to be skipping out on Xbox, but hey, Tomba is set to return. The Gex trilogy, however, this is the one that I'm personally really excited about. These are old PlayStation 3D platformers, and even though it never really got as much love as games like Mario, Spyro, Crash, and Banjo-Kazooie, Gex, it still had a moderate amount of fans. Enough fans to span 3 games and then some more on future platforms. But we haven't seen Gex in such a long time. Now, I will warn you all, if you haven't played these games before, they do have some cheesy one-liners that might not be for everybody. But if you like 3D platformers as I do, I'm kind of rooting for this trilogy here. And hey, if it does well, maybe, just maybe, we can get a completely new installment. Let's go take a look at the poll of the day. Though, where I asked you all, if Microsoft completes the Activision Blizzard acquisition, do you think more publishers will be bought out in the coming years? I guess I wasn't really too specific on this. I probably should have included a specific timeline here. But yes, most of you do agree that this will happen. 82% of you said yes, while 13% of you said no. So I found the results here rather interesting, but I'm actually not expecting a full-on consolidation as some people are expecting. I think that there will be more interest for sure. Though, where that interest comes from, that's the part that has me curious. I know Sony often comes up in this conversation and that they're going to come out and acquire Square Enix or Take-Two or whatever. This rumor is, yearly by this point, but I just don't foresee that. I guess Square Enix is a little bit more on the realistic side of things. I question that. I'll come back to that in a second. But I have to stop people from this whole Take-Two EA thing. Sony doesn't have that type of money. And even with companies like Square Enix, first off, the two would have to come to some type of agreement. And from what it sounds like, Square right now is more interested in getting investments for particular studios and IP than selling off entirely. I think it would be better for Sony to just kind of invest in those particular studios than just flat out acquiring the entire publisher, because a lot of their games actually fit better on Nintendo's platform anyways. I think Sony, though, will continue to do what they've been so successful at, and that's picking up independent studios with a lot of upside. The big names here, though, I think to kind of watch out for, though, are companies like Netflix, Amazon, Tencent, and even Disney. These are all companies that have shown interest in gaming, and if they wanted to plunge, they could target a publisher. Will that happen, though? That's a little bit more debatable, but we have learned that publisher acquisitions are definitely on the table, so we can't really rule anything out. Anyways, though, that's it for this episode. But if you liked the video, don't forget to bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Also, if you'd like to support the channel through Patreon, thank you for making this content possible. Peace out.